Morning, everyone. We're going to get started with the meeting. We're going to jump in with introductions, and we can just go around the table and introduce ourselves. I'm Tony Luisi. I am the Regional Director for DEC Region 4.
I'm Chris Waldo, the Executive Director.
Patty McLaughlin, Office Manager.
Andrew Curry, Director of Operations, Town Economy.
Harvey Alexander, Citizen.
Keith Golder, Natural Resource Steward for State Parks.
Nancy Pearson, Citizen Member.
Don Cejas, representing Supervisor Barber, Town of Gilbert.
And John Dross, and Citizen Representative.
All right, thank you all. First off, let's consider the minutes from the June meetings that were included in the board packet. Does anyone have any comments or discussion on those minutes? And if not, can we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
I'll second that.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. Moving right on to comments from the public. Does the Friends Group or any other member of the public have anything to share?
Hi, Don.
If Don wants to speak.
Good morning, everybody. Don Allard. I'm president of the Friends of the Pine Bush community. Just wanted to give you an update on what the Friends have been doing over the last quarter. We've been busy. We're supporting the reserve staff with their public programs, activities, and projects. In addition to our own fundraising efforts, corporate grants have been welcomed by the Friends this summer, including gifts from the 3M Company and the Bank of Greene County. Our fundraising efforts continue to support Ticket to Ride, which pays for school bus transport to the Discovery Center for qualifying schools, supporting the Science Lecture Series. Tonight's talk is on the conserving shrubland wildlife with the help of DNA, paying for cost of the recent Barron's Birding Blitz, which was a great success, 80 people participating, and supporting staff at the Nature Night Out events in July and August. The Friends' more social and socially conscious activities have included 2 hikes per month throughout the summer, including a joint hike with the Friends of the Woodlawn Preserve. Our quarterly book club, last month's read being Why Fish Don't Exist by Lulu Miller, a trail cleanup, and a service night at the Northeast Regional Food Bank. And last but not least, a happy hour event at Swifties for friends to kick back and relax. Fundraising for the short film documentary to be completed soon is going well, with 2/3 of the monies raised so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Anyone else from the public who'd like to share anything? All right, moving right along to reports. Starting with me, I do not have a report for today, so I will turn it to anyone else from the board. And hearing none, Chris, the mic is yours.
Okay, I'll keep it brief. I usually try to put some highlights out there about the update that's in the board packet, but I'll avoid that because we have a pretty heavy agenda. We always like to end early. But reiterate what Don said about the Barron's Birding Blitz. That was a new event that the commission took on in partnership with the Friends. They were the sponsor for it. With the Audubon Society of the Capital Region and the Hudson Mohawk Bird Club. We had an internal committee that was led by Beth. We had Neil Dillon and Tammy on that too. We had Eileen Burns from the Friends and Cindy Edwardson from the Mohawk Hudson Bird Club. They were the committee. And then there were 16 volunteers that helped them today. Like Don said, close to 80 people, resounding success. And I think we'll probably do it again next year. Anybody from the staff want to mention anything more about the bird blitz? we
found 101 species.
That's right. And all that is, you know, we make it a fun event for people, but it's actually citizen science where we're actually getting data from participants, right? So.
Is it all visual identification or does audio identification?
Both, as long as at least 2 members of each team could confirm the sighting or the sound. Yeah. There were a litany of rules.
Let's see. In the board packet, there's a summary of the burns to date. Today, we're actually burning again. We got that email for notification. Tyler's burning an area over in Blueberry Hill. It's about 8 acres. So far, we've burned about 200 acres. We've burned 12 units. This would be magic number 30. And there's a board evaluation in your board packet that's shown up here on the screen. You can take a look at that. I didn't have that in time for the June meeting, so it's in your packet here. That's something we provide to the authority's budget office every year. And I think
could you scroll down there, Chris?
Sure.
Were there any, does anything stand out? Anything we need to address?
Nope, I don't think so. We have either we agree or someone agreed. There's no disagree, someone or either disagrees. And that's fairly typical.
Right. And then the context for the burning, is this, are we at an average year of burning or greater, less?
I would say that we're doing pretty well for the wet weather that we've had.
Yeah. Just below average.
It's below average. 200 acres is still a pretty good number for the season that we've had. We'll see if we have a fall that's not so wet. That'd be nice. So we're in pretty good shape. And we burned actually into December. Any other questions for me? Okay.
Turning it to Neil.
All right. Hang on.
I'll speak slowly. Good morning, everyone. Happy fall. In your packet is the technical committee's quarterly report with the usual table at the beginning of that. A couple of things to highlight. One, for the city of Albany really is just a landfill habitat restoration project that continues to move forward. There was no new projects in the town of Gilderland. With the withdrawal of Pine Bush Senior Living, that eliminated the one project we had that had been active. The bulk of the technical committee's review and the bulk of the development activity is all in the town of Colony. There are currently 5 active projects, all with full protection areas, and those are detailed in your packet. And I'm not sure where to stand for this camera, Chris, so let me know if I need to move. But I did put together a couple of slides for you. There's one new project in particular in the town of Colony that I wanted to highlight. It's at 1093 Kings Road. It's Precision Engineering. They're proposing a 23,500 square foot office warehouse. Can you go to the next slide, Chris? Yep. Actually, go back one. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Just want to give everyone context first. When you look at the sketch plan for the project, the proposal is between Kings Road, Curry Road, and Morris Road. So it's a full protection area that's been a high priority for the commission as long as I've been here, a couple of decades. Next one, Chris, please. To give you a sense of where it is within the vision map, here you're looking at Interstate 90. The lime green colors are areas that are recommended for full protection in the management plan that you all have adopted. And this project is sandwiched, this long rectangle here in the middle. And as you can see, it's surrounded by preserved land on 3 sides. It's got already protected preserved land on 3 sides of it, owned by either the town of Colony or the state of New York, I believe. Next one. Just zoom in on that a little bit more. So it's in a full protection area. It's also in the town of Colony's Conservation Overlay District. And it's valued for its linking protected lands with rare species inland pine barrens. I already mentioned that. It's really essential to building a contiguous preserve. It's fully restorable habitat. The applicant has proposed a minimal deed restriction on a small portion of the property. And when I presented, the reason this is up is that I presented this to the town of Colony's planning board when it was up for a concept review. And I mentioned to them that we appreciated the deed restriction, but in particular, because it's an actively managed ecosystem, habitat management is really essential. So simply setting aside a small narrow corridor well, that looks good on paper, it's not necessarily going to satisfy the objectives of the management plan. And that really, ultimately, somehow figuring out how to protect that property and striking a better balance is where we wanted to go. So if you go to the next slide, Chris, this has the last slide on project review.
Multitasking,
You are.
doing my best here. That one?
Morning, Jessica.
There we go.
Yeah, can you zoom in, show them the whole slide?
So you can zoom out.
Yeah, there we go. So when I presented this to the planning board, I mentioned that the technical committee has not reviewed this yet. We reviewed it 7 years ago when it was up. And since all their approvals expired, so they have to go back to the drawing board. But it said that when we bring this, the committee would likely reiterate our 2016 comments, we would likely recommend that the applicant update their conservation analysis. It's got Hunter blue butterfly and rusted elephant habitat on 2 sides of their project, and they have an open field full of wildflowers that's, for all intents and purposes, could be occupied habitat. So they need to update their surveys. Fish and Wildlife Service and DEC will only accept the survey for 5 years. So if the site has not been surveyed in 5 years, it needs to be resurveyed. But lastly, I recommended that ultimately, if this project is approved, we look forward to working with them to try and strike a better balance. And I use the Loopy Way project as an example. There are many examples in the town of Albany and Gilliland, where even in a full protection area, a portion of a project is developed, but a large portion is then donated to the municipality for inclusion in a preserve. So I use that Loopy Way as an example for the planning board. Most of the planning board members are relatively new, and we have not worked with them through a project in full protection before. So I tried to highlight Loopy Way as an example of a better balance than simply a deed restriction over a very narrow, small corridor.
How big is the parcel?
So that's a great question, John. I should have put that in here. The whole parcel is like 26 acres.
And they're doing a half-acre building and a couple acres.
Right, the whole
disturbance.
Right, the whole thing would be around 3.
Yeah. And can they move it closer to the road and then perhaps dedicate the rest?
That would be
in the
ideal.
back,
That would be
something like
ideal. Where they're proposing to build it is actually on the former go-kart track. If you've been down Morris, where that is.
Yep, yep.
So the footprint of the development that they're proposing itself isn't necessarily problematic.
Right.
If, as you just suggested, the rest of the property could somehow be protected.
Yeah.
You can see it's centrally located, and it's really essential to completing the vision for the preserve. So that's it for project review from the technical committee. The last thing I wanted to...
Do you ever meet with one-on-one with the applicant, or you do it all at?
We have, and actually, the owner of that project came in when he was going through the project process initially back in 2015 and 2016, and met with the committee. Yeah. But I think because both the planning director in the town of Colony is relatively new, with new staff and new planning board, Chris and I were talking about this morning, of going and meeting with John McGuire, and sitting down and having that one-on-one and giving him the overview of the whole project review process and how we got there. But that's I like your thinking about that.
Jumping back to that withdrawal you talked about, is that a permanent withdrawal, or are they going to resubmit a new proposal?
They had to resubmit a new proposal, and that's what they did. The town of Colony gave them concept approval.
Right.
And now they're working through the review process, and we should see this at the next iteration as they approach final approval. Any other questions on that? All right. Can you go to that last slide, Chris? The last thing I wanted to talk about with the time that I had was just to review the fire management plan update, which was in your packet. I spelled out the whole process here. In March of 22, you authorized the review of the plan. In May 3rd, we provided you with the white paper and the draft fire management. We provided the white paper and the draft fire management plan to the technical committee to review. Based on their comments, on June 15th at the commission meeting, we discussed the white paper and the fire management plan. The white paper basically just spells out what we're looking to change and why. We posted that draft on June 19th after your June meeting. The fire management plan and the white paper were posted on the website. Legal notices in all the papers. Thank you, Patty. And we opened public comment period. On July 18th, we held a public hearing here. We had 3 people come. All 3 of them were well aware of what we've been doing and why, and just wanted to learn more about the fire management program in general. and the public comment period closed on the 28th. We received, so that was a 43-day public comment period. We didn't, according to seeker, we didn't have to do a public comment period at all. Environmental Conservation Law, Article 46, that governs the commission, says we had to have a public meeting. But we didn't have to post it and do a public comment period, but I felt it appropriate to do so. And we went with 43 days instead of 30, which is typical, just to make sure everybody has ample time to review and give us their feedback. We received one comment, which I'm highlighting here for you. I see huge wildfires in the news and feel very proud that my local community manages this threat so efficiently. I had never experienced anything like the Canadian wildfire smoke a few weeks ago, and now I'm even more grateful of the work you do preventing wildfires. Now that I see firsthand the far-ranging impact, I hope more communities can learn from you. Which I thought, we get one comment, that was and that actually follows the editorial in the Ultima Enterprise, right? Kristen, it's about our firm program in the 30 years that we've been doing this and the benefits that it provides to the community at large, in addition to the global ecology we're trying to manage. So at this point, to end the process on the review of the management plan overall, today's meeting, you have within your packet a resolution to consider adopting a negative declaration and the seeker short form, which I have in the blue folder for Chris, and adopting the updated fire management plan. So if that falls, if you do that today, that will close the whole process for reviewing the management plan, and which will then start the 5-year clock again according to ECL 46, and we'll have to review the management plan again in 5 years or less if the staff decides there's something that needs to change. That was a lot. Any questions? Thank you.
Neil, is this the time to ask about changes you've made to the fire management plan?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm just curious about the media. The one big change from what I can tell is deletion of the media plan.
Right, you dropped it for.
Yeah. So what's rationale for that?
So the media response plan became its own new entity. So overall, for the commission, we now have an emergency response plan for dealing with all kinds of emergencies, which includes an escape prescribed fire, a wildfire, buildings on fire, medical emergencies, anything that we all as staff might encounter. So because everything that was in the media response plan of the fire management plan is now incorporated into our policy procedure manual, we decided we didn't need it there. Yeah, great question.
It's actually not in the policy. It's a standalone.
So
The emergency action plan is a standalone document. We have it.
I just want to commend you guys, the whole team, for how far this program has come. And, the Nature Conservancy, DEC, and others have tried to get fire on the ground in other parts of New York State. And you guys have really matured this program into something that's really accepted and embraced by the community, which is not easy next to a landfill in the middle of suburbia, next to a highway. And I think it's really an incredible model, not just the burning itself and the ecological outcome, but the community programming and the work that the team has done is just amazing. So congratulations.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah, it's real.
And I think all of us, but it's such an example just that there's a national conference that's going to be hosted here in Albany next year of fire science and fire managers because of all the work that we've been doing and what they've been hearing about, what the outside fire management community has been hearing and seeing about this program. They all want to come here next to Albany next spring for a big conference, probably about 300 people.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's get up. Next up, financial report by Lisa.
Good morning. Okay, we have a financial, is this okay? All right, here we go. Financial reports through July, so April, May, June, and July for this fiscal year. We'll start on the revenue side. Dues and contributions are $2,000 higher. This is due to our Trustco budget. We budgeted $80,000, and it's coming in at $21,600 per quarter. We had a private donation of $375. Government grants and contracts. This thing comes at 96% of budget, directly related to expenses below, which are about 95% of budget. Mitigation fees, $4,000 over budget is their landfill. We had $4,000 more than we budgeted first quarter. Lease revenue is on budget, and other revenue is $10,000 higher than budget. This is our merchandise sales in the gift shop. So they are over budget for the year, giving us a total revenue of 98% of budget. For July, on to expenses, personnel and fringe are $64,000 under budget, $23,000 in seasonal salaries. We have less seasonal employees than we budgeted for this year. And the rest is in benefit payments. We did get an estimated invoice for New York State local retirement system of about $185,000, which will hit in November on our balance sheet. Travel and training is slightly under budget, and this is just due to less preserved travel at this time. Contractual is on budget. Communications is $14,000 over budget. This is due to a replacement of banners on Washington Avenue that we didn't expect, and signage for kiosks. So it will be over budget for the year, most likely, as we move on. Occupancy, $5,000 under budget, and this will increase in the winter months. Our placeholders for repairs for both the Barron's House, the Discovery Center, and utilities. Supplies and equipment are close to budget. Other expenses, slightly over budget. This is really just due to dues and fees. We had a water deposit for the city of Albany for fire that we had to make of $700 this year. Total expenses are 95% of budget. Overall revenue and expenses came in slightly under budget, giving us an operating income of $59,000. If we move on to capital expenditures, this is a balance sheet account, but we include this because it's cash. Our cash budget, we have an operating flow cash surplus of $26,000. If we look at the non-cash operating revenues, depreciation expense is $84,000, and we had a gain on investments through July of $180,000, giving us total change in that position, which is our actually audited figures based on our accrual-based system is $155,000. If we look at our cash, our Paris budget includes capital, so it would be $123,000. Any questions on that? All right. On to the statement of net assets. Our cash is down $875,000. This is due to DEC funds owed from April to July. Good news is we received 2 payments in September. So this caught up, which leads to the next grant receivable was $969,000. Again, money owed from April through July. This has been paid as of September. Accounts receivable. This is mitigation, and this also has been paid. Lease receivable, you will see this change at the end of the year when the auditors do their final adjustment to the new GASB requirement. This will stay the same until March. That's the new, we have to hold everything in a liabilities and a receivable account for our rent. Inventory stayed the same. That will change. That changed in September. We just did an actual inventory as of September 19th. Prepaid expenses are $0. You will see this every year from March to April. We put everything in prepaid for the following year, and then we reclass it in April, so that's $0. Investments, as I said, gained $180,000, mostly due to the endowment fund. Depreciation, capital assets, depreciation expense was $84,000, and conceptual design, we added $32,000 to our fixed assets. Land remained the same, and deferred outflows and net pension asset remained the same. This will change in November with our GASB report for 68 and 71, and when we make our $185,000 payment to the New York State retirement. On to liabilities, accounts payable increased slightly, $1,000. This is just expenses accrued. Deferred revenue increased $15,000. This is PNC rent that's paid ahead of time for the following month. Pension liability will change again in November when we get our GASB report. And lease liability went down slightly. This was a liability of payment in March that went into April. OPEB liability, I'm going to run this report soon. This will change in January when we run our full staff health insurance expenses and OPEB liability. So total liabilities decreased slightly $1,000 just due to accrued expenses. On to net assets, capital assets, and land decreased $52,000. This is depreciation expense of $84,000 and purchases of $32,000 as above. Reserved assets remained unchanged, and total increase in net assets is $155,000, which relates to our income funds on the investment side for July at least, we have $180,000 increase. Most of that, we had a slight loss in both reserve funds, the reserve fund and the OPEB reserve fund, but we had a gain of $7,000 in the Discovery Fund endowment, and the endowment gained $203,000. We're up $95,000 as of our August investment. I'm not sure what September is. So. Any questions on that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and Erin for an update on the grounds project.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Just a couple of quick updates on the Discovery Center grounds project. At our last meeting in June, we went over the concept design for improvements to the grounds. And at that time, our thinking was that our next step would be to pursue design and construction documents for the entire 6 phases of the project. Since that time, we've done a lot of thinking about that, conversations, consideration. We decided it would probably be a better idea to approach it as a phased project and to approach those design and construction documents with each phase rather than doing them all at once. And the reason for that was we were concerned that if we did all of the design and construction documents, there might be changes in building code, other changes that happen along the way, and those plans could then become outdated. We'd have to expend additional funds to update them, so that it made more sense really just to kind of take those one phase at a time. So that would mean our first phase, phase A, would be the accessible trail project. So our plan is to pursue design and construction documents for that and implement that phase of the project and complete that. So along the way, while we were thinking about this change in our approach, we also were thinking about, we really identified a need for expertise in helping us navigate this project. It is a pretty big project with 6 different phases. And so we thought back to when we first started working on the Discovery Center building. And we worked, as everybody knows, used to be the Sept building. And we had the task of turning into the Discovery Center an office space. So we collaborated with New York State Office of General Services, OGS, and we were able to work together. They were able to help us navigate that whole process and really help this project become a reality. So we thought it would be appropriate to look into that again and see if that relationship could be revisited. We tried that again. So Chris and I recently met with OGS and their design and construction staff, and they were really interested in the project. This is the type of work that they do. And my understanding, they worked with the DEC on the Five Rivers project, their environmental education center. So it looks like a really promising possibility. At this point in time, we just need to figure out some logistical things, some of basically the administrative end of how things happen and how cash flows between entities like the Commission and OGS. So we do need to do a little bit more information finding before we can proceed with that, but we thought it was a really promising meeting. And again, they're really interested in the project. They're really impressed with the concept design, shared that with them. And so that was a really great positive outcome to that meeting.
Erin, will they do the design work internally, or will they then hire an engineering firm?
So it could go either way. Mostly right now what they're doing is working with consultants. So they have a couple of different approaches to that. They do have a lot of expertise in-house, engineering, architecture, landscape architecture, but they also have a lot of firms that they work with. They also know the RFQ process very well and the whole procurement process. So they really kind of have expertise all around, but it probably would go in the direction of working with consultants to work on that design and construction phase. Yes, sir.
Can phase B overlap with phase A? Because I don't see a whole lot of.
There is a potential for that when we talk with them. Again, it's very much just kind of concept right now, thinking out loud, but looking at it, theoretically, you could be working on implementing one stage and have started the next stage of planning. So yeah, there could be some overlap. The really important thing is having the money secured ahead of time before you embark on next phases. Any other questions?
No, I'll just say for awareness that the commission has set up a meeting next month, I believe, with DEC Commissioner Sagos and Parks Commissioner Coolestate to kind of present the project ideas.
Yeah.
So that'll be great.
That's great.
Yep.
Looking forward to that. Good. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin.
All right, let's move into our 4 action items, starting with the re-election of 3 officers. Casey as our new vice chair, delegate of Parks Commissioner. Don continuing on as secretary, and John continuing on as treasurer. If there's any need for discussion, can we have a motion to approve? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you all.
And
for-
thank you, Casey.
We're happy to have you, Casey.
Yeah, great. As I've reminded people, any officer's position, as in the bylaws, any of those duties can be delegated to staff, as they are, as the treasurer and secretary. Okay.
All right, action item B is the review and potential approval of a new multi-year contract. Chris, can you give us the details?
Sure. Eastern Heat and Cooling, Eastern has managed the HVAC systems for this building since it was built in '86. And they've continued to do a great job. We are coming to the tail end of their current 3-year contract. This is for a new 3-year contract, and price increases of between 11 and 12%. It's pretty reasonable given today's situation and inflation. So just kind of a summary of it.
Any questions on that? We have a motion to approve. So, second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next up is the formal approval of the updated fire management plan that Neil covered during his committee presentation. Any additional questions? And as previously discussed, this is also approval of the seeker negative declaration for this action. Unless there are any questions, I'll move to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Just wanted to typo of that action item, second period, at the end of the first resolve. Next time. Fix that. That's my attention. Chris, all down.
All right, and finally, the formal updates to the policies and procedures manual. Chris, can you give us an overview of this?
I can. Actually, what I can do is I sent this to you all yesterday. I'll give credit to Nancy Pearson for bringing this up in the audit committee last week, and she said, "Can we see a red line version of that?" I said, "It's a nightmare to look at." And then I said, "You know what? You should have that." So I sent that yesterday, the red line version, and a summary of the changes in that. I can pull that up for you. Bear with me. So we haven't done a major overhaul of the policies and procedures in a while. The last time we did it was we worked with Harris Beach and the HR labor attorney we worked with then. That was back in 19. The board said after we adopted that we don't need to see policy and procedure updates unless they're substantive or really significant. So we've made minor ones going forward. This one, it started back in December, knowing that New York State was going to be coming out with a number of new laws, including the update to their sexual and other harassment prevention policies. So that started this, and then there's a number of other new ones that came out. So Bond, Chonik, and King, we work with an HR labor attorney there. They're our primary source. They led the project, worked with their staff to update everything that you see in that plan. And basically the purpose of this is to bring it fully into compliance with all the New York State laws and regs. And this is a summary of those. And you don't want me to go through all these, I'm sure.
Anything of particular note?
There's of specific note, there's a social media policy, which it wasn't detailed at this level before, and it's basically the employee's use of your personal accounts, posting things that are work-related, or posting things that you could appear as being a Pine Bush Commission employee that may not necessarily be appropriate in your account. I think it's things everybody knows. It was in policies before. That's there. There's a number of things in here that have to do with non-discrimination and accommodations as well, reasonable accommodations for things, including disabilities and religious beliefs, but that also includes, that ties back into, there's a new lactation and pregnancy law in New York State, and that ties into a lot of this. So that's in there. And then there are much more detailed versions of these leaves: bereavement, military leave, leave for spouse, member of armed forces, witness and victims leave, jury duty, emergency responder leave, voting leave. Those were all in the PMPs, but they weren't detailed out before, and Bond detailed all those out for us. And then adult recreational marijuana use and medical marijuana, that wasn't touched on in any level of detail, so that is in there too. That's under a drug and alcohol-free workplace. And as you know, the state is continuing to try and figure out how this works as they move along. Anything else?
For us non-employees, is there anything in there that would, for the social media, that would change?
For you non-employees?
Yeah.
So as a board member?
Right.
No, the only thing you're subject to is the conflict of interest policy as a board.
And that has not changed?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
And the bylaws and the public officers law, there are various other things.
Right, right. So there's been no change. That's no problem.
Nope. No. That's my question. Mr. Boston?
No, I like well, I like the addition of social media words. My thought is it's about what my mother told me 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Be careful what you put in writing.
Yeah.
But anyway,
That's what it is.
Sign of the times needs to be said.
Agreed. Any other questions on the PMPs? Actually, the one thing I should say is because it's such a large update, the attorney that we work with, I asked if she would join one of our department director meetings. So there's the 5 department directors to come in and answer any specific questions for that. And she's doing that October 25th. So she's going to join our director's team. And I said, you know, and for staff to work in those departments, if you have questions, put those in writing. We'll get them back from the attorney so we can clarify. It is, PMPs are what they are, and they turn into a very, very clearly legally written document, as they are with probably nonprofits and that. Does it not like this?
Does this also apply to volunteers?
It will, yes. So that's the next step. It's going to the volunteer policies, procedures. I'm going to have Bond update those. I wanted to have the board look at this first, and then we'll move on.
Would the board be considered volunteers?
No.
He's really worried about his social media.
Harvey, find Harvey.
You have a hard time finding it.
Something we should know.
I have an extremely good filter named Mary. So.
I guess I would suggest what Mr. Russ's mother told him.
And thinking back, it wasn't 40 or 50 years ago, it was 60 years ago.
So yeah, that's good. So the volunteer PMPs will be updated too. I mean, and it'll be verbatim language, and obviously just anything that has to do with being an employee is extracted.
So staff got to have input in this, right?
No.
No.
Staff has I have no input on this.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no. No, this is
It's all legal.
it's
Okay.
done by a human resources and labor attorney. If I disagreed with something,
Then
if I disagreed with something, it would be disagreeing with something about how it would apply to our entity as a state agency.
Okay.
Nothing more.
Okay.
As a matter of formality on the resolution, could we add at the end, before the period, subject to correction of any typographical errors or some minor things that we'll adjust?
Any other questions I can answer? And if you actually have any very specific questions, I can go to the attorney, to the law firm, and answer those. Every question costs money. I come up with my questions, I come up with my questions.
Any other discussion? We have a motion to approve the updated manual.
I'll make that motion as amended by Tony.
Second. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, great. We're ahead of schedule. Let's move on to the presentations.
Everybody's wanting to know what's behind the curtain. I didn't want to frighten anybody when you came in this morning. So
Oh, that's what's under the blanket. Should have known that.
Just give me a second, I have to share my screen. I'm just gonna put it. All right. So I'm gonna be moving around. Do you need my camera on or my? No. Okay. Good morning. For those of you who might not officially know me, I'm Jackie's attorney, lead educator here at Serve. And today I'm going to present on the American Red Cross, the training that I have been doing here for many years, I'll explain that, and emergencies. I want to get your brain thinking about emergencies. Background, I've been trained as an American Red Cross adult, child, infant CPR, AED, and first aid instructor since 2009. And thank Pine Bush for allowing me to do that initially and purchase all the equipment. So what I'd like to start with, as I said, emergencies. What signals you, I'd like you to participate a little really quickly, that there's an emergency? Anything, just throw it at anything. Screams, yes, what else? Smoke, smells, yes, what else?
Anaphylactic shock.
Oh, okay, right, the anaphylactic shock, yeah, they'd be sweating and maybe even passed out, ashes, yeah.
Sirens.
What's that?
Sirens.
Sirens, yep. Yeah, so all different types of noises, right? We have screeches, bangs, clangs, screams, shouts, all different types of noises. You mentioned odors, smells, gases, unfamiliar odors, things like that would create an emergency. A lot of people don't think about this one, but unusual appearances or behaviors. I know for my brain, sometimes I go to stereotypes or things that I would see and say, okay, and then I have to look at the whole picture. So in emergencies, and while you're thinking of emergencies, how would you act? Is this an emergency if you came upon this person? What would you do? Would you know what to do? The 3 C's, check, call, and care. Would you know what questions to ask? The acronym, new acronym now, is SAM, signs and symptoms, allergies, medical conditions, and medicines that you would ask them if they're on. Would you want to treat? Could you treat? And those are all the questions I'd like to just keep in your head, and that emergencies can happen anywhere. And they happen here, and I bet I could poll every single staff here, and every single person could at least tell you one emergency, if not many, many, that we've all encountered. I just wanted to share my, just one very quickly. When I first started here, we were out on a snowshoe, and grandmother had come up to me and asked, is my granddaughter going to make it on the snowshoes? And I said, she'll be fine. We stopped, and there were a lot of other kids, and it was a family snowshoe hike. And unfortunately, that trail is closed now. It was my favorite, the red trail back here. But we were out as far as possible, and of course, the kids are running ahead, and the adults are lagging behind, and I
positioned myself in the middle, and some gentleman comes running up to me and said, "There's a lady back there. It doesn't look so good." And so I asked, yelled to the kids to come back and went back. And I had worked in the medical profession for over 15 years, and her color was not good. She was as gray could be. And upon asking her, "Do you have any medical conditions?" she said, "I'm a diabetic." And then proceeded to not have anything with her. And I had to use my wilderness first aid at that point. We had to chair carry her. I had to call 911. The paramedics had to come down the big sand dune and the stairs to meet us at that frost pocket area we call. At that point, I thought I was going to have to work on the EMTs because they were huffing and puffing. Is there any easier way out of here? And I said, no, we have to go back up. Her husband had been called. And if anybody knows anything, they'd given her a tube of goo, taken her blood sugar, and it was still only 40. So what saved her was a vitamin C drop that I had in my pocket. And she kept talking to me, but we had to keep switching. It was very harrowing. The disappointing part to all this was she was a known diabetic at 40. And that all could have been prevented, but I was grateful that that's the way it turned out. And we've had many others, as I'm sure many people can share. So why be certified? I asked myself that. I make sure I mention that during all the training, because each minute that you don't do CPR or AED is delayed, you decrease a person's survival by 10%. You have about 10 minutes. And I always put that in there, and yes, it's kind of shocking, like, oh my gosh, because even when you start, I know I've been in so many emergency situations and I'm thinking, oh my God, I have 10 minutes. But I don't want to end with that, or I don't want to have that be what's in your mind. I want to share some positive facts. So anybody that takes training here or in the Red Cross in general, you're certified for 2 years in both adult, child, infant, CPR, AED, and first aid. I trained over 325 people since 2011. I know it doesn't seem like a lot in all those years, but it's basically staff and volunteers. I'll elaborate on that in just a minute. After the initial investment about buying the mannequins, I saved the commission almost $22,000. If we were to send every individual, I just based that on today's numbers, out to do training with the American Red Cross, it's about $100 to $150 per person. And I just apply as an instructor for that recertification fee online, and it's $30. So that is beneficial cost. We have a first aid station. If anybody wants to visit it before we leave, it's literally around the corner. That's what it looks like. One of our seasonal staff a few years ago helped me put this together. Everything is labeled, alphabetized for any kind of first aid you might need. Here's a chair if we need to. And it's wheelable, so if we need to get it out to the center or help someone, we have it. We all have, I can quickly pass these around, bags in our backpacks. They are heavy. We do carry them though. So this is what we carry as educators, and just a list of ingredients and everything in there. And pass that around. And then lastly is the seasonal also put together a full kit for all our vehicles. This is pretty extensive. She did a fabulous job. It not only has a list of all the supplies, but it actually has a key where everything is. So that is in every single vehicle now for anybody that's out in the field. They're all shown that as well. So, just want to let you know, we also work with many partners, not just the volunteers, but we work with and many more. These are just a few. DC, the Nature Conservancy, Mohawk, Hudson Mohawk, and I starred Columbia Green because I asked if it was okay to share his story. They all meaning their staff, the director, their staff, I gave their training here in July. None of them had ever been certified. Troy had been taking it with me when he was with the Nature Conservancy. They had never had any emergencies that I had asked up to that point. 2 weeks later, I got an email. Troy was in a restaurant with a director, and somebody screamed. There was an emergency, somebody had fallen down the stairs. And one thing you learn in the training is you just don't randomly scream, somebody call 911, because you don't know if it gets done. So I make sure, I tell everybody, make eye contact with somebody, point to them, and say, you call 911. It hadn't been done. Troy did it. An EMT got there sooner. And then 2 of his staff were stewards out in the field, and no cell coverage, and one had stepped on a nest, a wasp nest, and got stung over 40 times. The young man stayed calm. His partner that he was working with said, got the information from him, like, are you allergic? Contact information in case he had gone into shock. We talked about shock. He walked him out very slowly, got him in the car, and drove to a spot where there was connection to get EMT services. So you just never know. They were all very grateful. So we feel this training is not only important, but could be the difference between life and death. And it's so important to one of our volunteers who just took it also in July, who recertified, who's been a volunteer more than 25 years. Her family, she came up to me at the end. She also had to use CPR, and a family member. And she said, what will it take to get better mannequins? Because they're pretty old, they're not all clicking anymore. And I said, well, I can get you a lift. So she has officially given the funds. I just got the word from the friends that the transaction was given to them, and they're going to purchase. So they're going to get new adult mannequins where when you press, you actually can see the blood flow. Really cool. The baby's diaper lights up when you do the right types of compression at the right spot, so you know you're doing it correctly. And we're also going to get new AEDs based on the Tobin Family Fund. So I'd like to say thank you very much for that donation. Everybody, that they will help moving forward. And if anybody here really wants to take the training, I'm offering it Saturday, October 7th, from 9 to 3, and I have 4 slots left open. If anybody would like to join, just let me know at the end. And at that, are there any questions?
Have you kept track of how many times any of these kits have been used? How often?
The first aid kits?
Yeah.
So the ones in the cars are used quite a bit, from minor things, anywhere from Band-Aids. We had allergic reaction because I remember Joel came to me and said, oh my gosh, the medication was outdated, so, or we're out of, I couldn't remember which one, we didn't have enough in there. So I try every year to make sure everything's fully stocked. Now it comes back to me and all the supplies are in there. Nothing seriously that I know of, but there is tourniquets in there for when they do chainsaw work in the field. There's blood stop, which stops bleeding very quickly. It has a coagulant in it. They're in there as well. There's smelling salts. There's glucose tablets. There's a lot in there.
It might be worthwhile to have a list somewhere where you just come in and say, I use this package, from this particular.
There is right next to the supplies.
That's
what
I was asking.
Yep. Oh, sorry. Yep. So I have it for both in there and the kit. A lot of times the seasonal staff, I don't expect that, but it is there. They are instructed in that in their orientation to break stuff down if they need it in there. Yeah, or they can come and fill it themselves.
So you're carrying Narcan?
That is new in the training. Yep, to show what the Narcan inhaler is. No, we do not. We do not carry Narcan. And I don't know what the actual policy would that be. I'd have to look into that, both from an instructor and from a facility, if we should have that here or not. Everybody is now.
I'm sure we have state parks too.
You do now at state parks? Thank you for that. I'll refrain, I'll pass that on to Chris.
We'll see what 5 Rivers does.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So even an AED, it's such a process to get an AED. You have to have a physician sign off. So we do have one here in the building, but we don't have portable ones for the field.
donation.
Yeah, fabulous.
Jack, you need a physician to sign up, so
Yes. If we were to use that within 24 hours, we have to fill out a report. Not only for here, I also did it for our church, and yes, and they have to sign off. You have to have a physician and hospital affiliate.
the training is 6 hours?
If you've never done it with me before, yes, it's 6 hours. This year, I'm gonna try and squeeze the staff down to just a couple hours because they've been doing it for 15 years with me. So I just gonna update what's new, and it changes every 5 years. So I have to make sure those updates because they review. They meaning the American Red Cross. There's a whole page of physicians that are reviewing every 5 years, similar to like our policy procedure and our management plan, and they come up with new, better ways. I think they're just trying to cram more and more information. It's very overwhelming. As a layperson who's never been around any medical thing, to get given all this information, even in 6 hours, can be very overwhelming. Yeah. And that's what I say. If nothing else, just give chest compressions. But you only can do within your level of training. So you can't administer medications, you can't go and give a tracheotomy or something like that. You have to only perform emergency with your. But again, then you're also covered under the Good Samaritan Act as long as it's not, there's a little legal phrase in there. I forgot it. But anyway. If there's no other questions, I will pull up. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack.
Well, they're switching. We invited Jess Cancelleri. Did I say your last name correctly? All right, I was that wrong. She is a research scientist with DEC's Division of Forest Health, and we, Tilly Dillon and I, have been working with she and folks from her shop over several years, deal with invasive insects, but in particular the southern pine beetle. And so we invited Jess today to give us an overview of the status of southern pine beetle in New York and the work that we've been doing together.
Thanks, Neil.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. We've been working with the pine bush for a really long time. As Neil said, I started working on southern pine beetle in 2014 when it showed up on Long Island. And I worked in a more operational sense back then. I was the first incident commander of that initial response. And then I began work as a research scientist and ended up in the lab for a long time. And then I focused more on the research of southern pine beetle and learning as much as we can about its behavior in the north. And then just this summer, I actually transitioned into a new position as the Forest Health Section Chief. So now I'm in central office. If any of you remember Jerry Carlson, I'm in his position. And so now I'm still the lab manager too until we fill that position. But I think my focus now is to do what I can during my time with DEC to promote better management practices and forest management practices devoted to ecological health and resilience. And it's no small task. As you mentioned earlier, Jess, I think, right, we don't have a lot of that infrastructure in DEC. So we're really starting from scratch, and we're aiming to accomplish things, that the pine bush has already been doing for 30 years. So just a quick review, southern pine beetle again showed up on Long Island 2014. There was extensive damage, about 100,000 trees dead by the time we even found it, because that happens in 4 to 6 weeks. You can go from a healthy to a dead tree in, about 6 weeks. So that's an aerial view of Connecticut State Park and some of the damage there. That stand has since basically converted to hardwood. I think there's only a handful of pitch pine left there. I'm not sure if there's been more recent restoration efforts or not. But essentially, we risk converting all of the central vine barrens to hardwoods without proactive management. So since 2014, our operational response has continued on Long Island, and I've been focused on monitoring it upstate, as I said before. So we've had a monitoring project going on since 2015, where we identified pitch pine or red pine stands upstate and put out traps. And the pine bush has been our partner in that from the very beginning. I think the first beetle we found at the Albany Pine Bush was in 2018, and it was just one beetle. So we always joked that it was like on our technician's pant leg or something because we didn't find any for a while. And then we didn't find it again until 2021 when we found a lot more. When I say a lot, I think it was about 200 beetles. But that year in 2021, we saw this significant jump. We had these very, very low level numbers downstate at like Scunnamunk State Park, Bear Mountain, those areas. And then suddenly in 2021, it expanded. You know, we went from catching 10 to 15 beetles at Scunnamunk to hundreds. And that's what the monitoring traps essentially are for, is so that it can cue us into a potential problem and a potential outbreak situation. And so we did publish those results of this sudden expansion. What you see here is the gray was the historic range prior to 2021, and then post 2021, all the new locations were in red. So we saw it expand into New Hampshire and Maine, and it's moved faster and further north than we ever anticipated. But what I can say still is that it's at very, very low numbers. And so the risk remains to be seen. It could potentially have great impact, and that impact will be confined to these ecologically sensitive areas. You know, our pitch pine barrens, our you know, high elevation red pine stands, things like that. We also have seen that temperature, we think, does play a role. We haven't necessarily published this yet, but we see a big correlation between the lack of minimum winter temperatures and rises in population. So we'll see 2 years where winters just don't get that cold, and then suddenly a jump in numbers. So I think that's going to be a huge driver of populations in the north, which it isn't in the south. They've kind of excluded that as a major factor. But up here, I think it's very much a big player. And so as I'm giving this SPB update, I'm also just trying to highlight some of the partnerships with the Pine Bush and talk about some of the research that has come out of these partnerships over the years. So we recently published another paper, myself and the U.S. Forest Service, about bark beetle and wood borer responses. So essentially, the work of Kevin Dodds and Neil and many others in the pitch pine community, you know, have been supporting adaptive management efforts for pitch pine for years. And as they start to build momentum, there is a concern that with increased pitch pine restoration comes more down woody debris, which supports the increase of certain what we call saprophytic insects, right, bark and wood boring beetles that attack the phloem of a tree. And so we just did an initial study to kind of assess, one, what the communities are, the bark beetle communities in these pitch pine stands, because that hadn't really been looked at prior. As you know, like, you know, Dylan, you've done a lot of work in entomology over the years, and a lot of those certain communities are established, like the cardinal blue butterfly, and more in like an ecological sense. But in terms of bark and wood boring insects, a lot of that hadn't been done yet. So we're establishing the community, what species are present, and then also how do they respond to different treatments, thinning, burning, and control. And the results are hard to just kind of capture in a really brief summary. It's kind of all over the place, but some things that we did see were that, you know, the main players were the scolatiny, the bark beetles, and cerambythis, longhorn beetles. Ips grandicalis was the Albany pine bush's most abundant bark beetle, and it did seem to respond a little bit to management in thin stands. And we've kind of seen that. Remember you called us years ago and said, hey, we had this fire, or that actually wasn't a thin, that was a burn, where one area had gotten a little too hot, and then there was like a little Ips outbreak in a few trees. So that's less common with Ips unless the fire gets really hot. But in this paper, we showed that they do respond to thin stands more than burned and controlled stands. However, as you probably know already, species richness was highest in the burned stands, and that's pretty established, that burning does promote species richness in all forms, which is great. But we're really just starting to kind of build the foundation of some of this work. So then our same partner, Kevin Dodds, the U.S. Forest Service, as part of a regional effort to characterize pitch pine stands across the Northeast, we've been collecting data across the state starting last year. And so Kelsey McLaughlin is our forest pathologist. She began doing a bunch of plot work down near Minnewaska State Park and working with state parks on that. And essentially, she wrote up all these reports, kind of documenting baseline conditions and forest stand conditions. And we were going to do that work at Albany Pine Bush, and we're slowly moving up north and doing the stand up north this year. But we already had all that data because you had cooperated with other research, and so that had already all been collected. So we don't think we need it at this point, which is great. And so I'm just showing, though, that these characterizations are really useful. And we always worry when we put out this stuff that no one's gonna want to know about it. But state parks, you know, just posted a southern pine beetle position down near Minnewaska, and part of that job is developing management plan for Minnewaska in the face of southern pine beetle risk. And they're using all of Kelsey's reports and integrating that information. So it's great to see, just in general, this increasing awareness of pitch pine restoration and management needs. And this is the paper that I just talked about, how we didn't need the data because it was already there. This is the paper that came out of that Pine Bush study. It was a study, and it was just published in May 2023. I don't have the full copy yet. I'm waiting for it. But it was a comparison of the Albany Pine Bush and Ossipee Pine Barrens, and essentially, again, just sort of documenting and characterizing these baseline conditions in an effort to support adaptive management region-wide. And one thing that it revealed was just sort of this, the diversity in management regimes that occur in all of these pine barrens, and the fact that that is necessary, right? That there's just not one strategy, and that depending on the exact conditions, you need to utilize different strategies. And so kind of bringing attention to that mosaic of management regimes that also, you know, mimic the frequency and intensity of natural conditions in terms of the disturbance that's needed to maintain these habitats. So, you know, for the pine bush, maybe this has always been the case, right? You've always been aware of this stuff. But in my community in forest health and residing in the divisional lands and forests, this is all kind of new, right? And what we've been waiting for to start just seeing this breadth of research. And, you know, there's NAFC, the North American Fire Science Exchange, has built this working group recently that Neil is part of and I'm part of. And it's essentially, there's a southern pine beetle working group within it, which is / pitch pine management. But it's recognized as an official working group now, and we get NAFC support. And just seeing all these people come together after all these years has been really amazing. Like, a lot of momentum has been built since I started. So an ongoing research project that Albany Pine Bush is also part of is our phenology and synchrony project, which is, as I said, we're monitoring southern pine beetle in its northern range. Some of its characteristics mimic what we see down south, but a lot don't. So this is an ongoing project where we're just kind of assessing the phenology of the beetle, looking at competitors and predators, and also how they sync up. Because the synchrony of southern pine beetle with its major predators determines how impactful a particular outbreak might be. We saw it on Long Island when it first showed up. We didn't have a whole suite of natural predators. For one, the habitat down there was not very diverse, right? It was like high density stands of pitch pine. And we saw those populations of natural predators build up over the years, but we definitely think it impacted what we saw on the ground initially, the absence of those predators. So this just shows some interesting things. So the Albany pine bush is in red. And so this shows our trap collection from last year, or is this 2021? No, it's 2022. So Scunnamunk is in blue down south, and they always get higher numbers. I don't know if it's because it's warmer, it's at a lower latitude, but there's not much pitch pine there. It's like a pretty diffuse, isolated stand of pitch pine, and yet sometimes we get trap counts as high as 1,500. And you're like, where do they all come from? We can't find them. Albany pine bush seems like it's in a good position right now. Each year, our trap counts are always very low. And you should be in a good spot, right? You've been doing what you need to do to prevent southern pine beetle from being impactful all along. And essentially what the pine bush does is what the exact management guidance is for mitigating southern pine beetle damage. So we feel, and Neil knows he's in a good position, but it's just gonna be a matter of time to be able to test that, you know? So far, so good. It's here, but it's at really low numbers. And upstate, even with the the variety of numbers that we get, 0 to 1,500 or whatever, we still can't find pitch tubes, we can't find infested trees. I think it's behaving as like a native bark beetle right now, and it's highly influenced by its major predators. So clary beetles, Synasimus dubius is southern pine beetle's most prolific predator. And so I know these graphs are kind of messy. It's kind of hard to tease it apart at first glance, but the big peak early in the season here shows the clary beetle activity. And then you can't even see, this is southern pine beetle in the red, kind of mimicking sort of the line that you just saw. We don't get southern pine beetle showing up in traps until July, which is really weird. It's supposed to come out in May. And at Scott month this year, we got some trap catches in May, but generally it doesn't show up until later. We're like, why? The temperatures are already starting to cool down by the time it peaks. And all we could think is it's because of that. It's because of that peak of claries. They might just be like exerting so much pressure on southern pine beetle that it's there, but it's just not showing up in traps because there's not enough of it to show up in traps. At least that's what I'd like to think is happening. So I thought that was really interesting. Why did I want to show you this one? That's kind of messy. There you go. I think again it just shows. Oh well. All right. So what this shows, the red is southern pine beetle. The blues are all of its natural predators. Wow. And so it just shows that again the peak of southern pine beetle that we captured in the traps is much different than the peak of its natural predators. And so eventually, I don't know, maybe that's something that could benefit the beetle. I don't know. Or is all this just a function of very low trap counts? We just don't have enough data to say for sure what's going on. Although there are some lure developments now going on. There's some lures being tested, right, that you've heard about, that are catching thousands of beetles. Pounds of beetles. It might be. We've wondered if we could use it as a control mechanism. Put some traps in the middle of a field and just let it catch them. But it's all you get a little anxious about putting that kind of powerful lure out there.
Because
what is the lure?
So historically, the lure, well, there's a couple different ones. We use a combination of frontalin, which is a southern pine beetle, sex pheromone, and alpha pinene, which is a host volatile. So it's essentially what a pine tree emits when they're stressed. So down south, they use a weaker lure. That's like they call it Cyrex blend. It's sort of like a fake turpentine. And so what we've added up north in some locations is real turpentine, which helps draw them in from further distances. So we use the turpentine in areas where we want to early detect it, and then we use the weaker lures in areas where we're doing research and we know it exists because we don't want to infest trees, essentially. So if you put a really strong lure out there in the wrong spot, you can initiate an infestation, which we did at Sunset Rock and was it like Rensselaer County or Washington County? It was just a few trees and we cut them out. Oh, it says right there, Sunset Rock in 2021. We think that was because of our trap. It happens sometimes. So this is our current state of southern pine beetle. We found it in Queensbury last year, Saratoga sandplain, so it just keeps moving. It's everywhere, we find an isolated pocket of pitch pine and we find it. So I think it's ubiquitous and it's probably been here for a while. And so, again, this is a message that the Albany Pine Bush has been aware of and promoting for 30 years. But like I said, we're a long ways off in DEC from essentially achieving what we'd like to achieve on the landscape in terms of management. And so with Long Island, we were starting from scratch down there. There was historically no forest management, no timber market to help offset the cost of management. And then the cost of getting wood off the island were extremely expensive. So in 2018, we funneled some EPF money to the Pine Barrens Commission to essentially build and develop a burn program. And the Pine Bush was there all along for that. We were essentially looking to Neil to say, tell us what to do and how to do, what do we need to do? And, I had a picture and I forgot to put it in, but the commission came up here and met with you and saw the site. And so we're essentially trying to build an Albany pine bush within the Central Pine Barrens Preserve, That's our goal. If we had it our way, we would just give them more money and let them just turn it into the successful thing that this has become, and just do more and more of that. And it's been going pretty well. You know, the northern long-eared bat listing has slowed things a little bit, but we're working with wildlife, and it's starting to ease up. And I think there's going to be management challenges, but I don't think it's going to like full out stop our efforts. We are starting to get away more from suppression. I think that's my next slide. So, we've had a raging infestation on Long Island for the last 2 or 3 years, and we think it's just the natural course of things, but also COVID. You know, we didn't do a lot of suppression for a couple of years. Our staff was limited, and we just couldn't get down there. And we've seen this huge outbreak, and it's once again reinvigorated a lot of like political attention into the Southern Pine Beetle program. We do have a lot of support at this point on Long Island for management, which again is totally different than when we started in 2014. But what this infestation has done is made it, again, super visible on the landscape, and a lot of this is state parks property. I think I have it on this slide. So in the Napeague and Hither Hills area, again, raging infestation. I think DEC, in partnership with state parks, cut over 4,000 trees trying to just slow the infestation. And we knew that we were just, it was like a needle in a haystack, but it's like extremely sensitive ecological habitat down there. The maritime pitch pine dune woodlands, S1 critically imperiled. And we just couldn't stop it. And so now what it's done is it's kind of, you know, state parks are starting to get into the management game, which is, again, really exciting. I think this has just been an opportunity for them to start thinking, oh yeah, these threats, you know, they're not going away. They're dealing with more of them than ever. And they're impacting not only ecologically sensitive habitat, but recreational opportunities. And so now we're working with them to find a way to get more management done. And they're dealing with it on their end in terms of trying to get management into their infrastructure, which hasn't historically been there. So Southern Pine Beetle has just sort of initiated a lot of concern, but also action throughout the region. And as we saw in that working group call the other day, there's land managers all over the Northeast now doing pitch pine management because of their concern for Southern Pine Beetle. And these are just some photos of what it looks like when it gets really bad. And, you know, in the Hamptons, some of these neighborhoods were completely transformed. You know, these were people's backyards, and they lost like literally 100% of their trees. You know, East Hampton has aerial photographs of neighborhoods that have been like 95% de-treed. What is even the word for that? Because there was no hardwoods, you know, and it just ripped through, and everybody lost their trees within like a month. It was crazy. And so that's what we don't want to happen here. But I honestly don't think it ever will, because of the situation that you put yourself in. Just a couple more photos. This is just what like homeowners are dealing with. Lots of wood. And so our big challenge right now is we can't take wood off the ground down there. We don't have a timber market. You know, it's hard to get wood off the island. So we've had to use cut and leaf suppression, which is essentially just felling trees and leaving them there. But now that's hindering our efforts to get more burning on the ground. And it's also, you know, it's not doing anything to the soils. We can't scarify the soils. So now there's a big effort to deal with that. And what are the best management practices to deal with that? And so in response to all this, in my new position, my goal was to integrate the Southern Pine Beetle program with our prescribed fire program. And so as of like a week or two ago, they're one program now. And Rob Cole is in charge of that. And our goal is to not just have a Southern Pine Beetle program, but just to focus on managing the pine barrens in a way that mitigates the impact of Southern Pine Beetle. So more preventative management, more burning, and less suppression, hopefully. I think this was just another quick detail I wanted to share, that unlike the South, we do see fall expansion of Southern Pine Beetle, so they always reliably have their peak, you know, in the spring and early summer. But we're seeing populations kind of stay somewhat low, and then in September, it just goes crazy, and it starts expanding into new spots, like through the fall. And sometimes on Long Island, up until like December, we're seeing spot expansion, which is crazy. And we don't really understand all the mechanisms. behind that now. If it's like a cold winter thing where they're trying to get to overwintering sites, perhaps, we don't know. But that's just something to keep in mind when you're reading the literature from the South, is that there are some timing discrepancies.
I was wondering if it's because of warming, that temperatures are getting warmer and they have a longer.
And they do,
life cycle.
yeah.
Yeah.
That is definitely part of it. They just have longer to do what they need to do. And I think that's all I have. I hope I didn't talk too long.
That was great.
No,
I'm a little over, Rosie.
Thank you.
Any questions?
I do have a question. Can you speak to the ash tree problem that we have? I mean, my property, I got hundreds of ash trees that are dead.
Yeah.
And as I travel around the state, you can just go boom, 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 boom.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like it's getting much, much worse.
It is getting worse. Well, it's pretty much swept through the entire state, so those areas that still remain are likely to be infested soon, if not already infested. So with EAB, again, it's something that we haven't done much with, like the post-emerald ash borer situation, and that's another goal of mine, is to do more restoration for that. One promising detail is that all the biocontrol, so APHIS has coordinated biocontrol releases across the state. You know, they are releasing 2 or 3 different species to control emerald ash borer. And the most recent information that came in from that showed that at the study sites, reproductive success of emerald ash borer was lower than it has been in a really long time. And they're actually seeing some trees regenerating and surviving. And what we don't know yet is how long will that persist? Will they hit a certain size class or a certain age where they will get attacked? Or are we going to be able to maintain ash on the landscape? So the only answer I really have is that I do think biocontrol, as it builds up, will be effective at regenerating a new cohort of ash. But we are going to lose most of what we have left. And then, you know, in terms of my efforts, I'd like to focus more on just post-EAB restoration. And we work with Tony D'Amato from UVM, who's done a lot of work on like substituting the ecological niche that the loss of ash has created. So what species are naturally regenerating that are fulfilling that ecological niche, or what ones can we plant in areas where there isn't any regenerating? So across the state, we have a huge regeneration problem. And so that's always like, as we move forward and try to bring more restoration or preventative management into our program, regeneration is like at the foundation of all that, because our forests are just not regenerating. So, you know, there are people looking into it. We just haven't had a chance to really do anything on the ground yet. There are grant opportunities and stuff for private land managers like GLRI, and you know, I've noticed just in general the Forest Service funding very much supports restoration efforts more than it ever has. So there's a lot of money there, and then the DEC offers invasive species grants that could be used for potential restoration efforts, but those aren't for private landowners. Those are for, you know, municipal land managers or land trusts and things like that. So another goal that we have in the long term is to try to get money into the hands of people. And one thing we've been focused on is working more with Regenerate New York and the 488 tax law, and seeing if there are ways that we can integrate forest health initiatives, you know, climate resiliency strategies into private land management.
So do you think at the end of the day, the ash will not, will be severely minimized or will be non-existent?
Yeah, I don't know. I think for a while it's going to be severely minimalized, yes.
Yeah.
But I think the future is uncertain because, and you have to look at the history of ash distribution as well, because a lot of our current distributions are based on human practices, right, and land management practices over the course of the last couple hundred of years. So I don't know as much about ash, but like with white pine, right, when white pine needle damage showed up, we thought it was going to kill all the white pine. And it didn't, and it turned out it was really more of a density problem than it was a disease problem. And then we realized, well, we just have way too much white pine on the landscape. Like, it's not supposed to grow this way. It's more of like it's a dominant tree species, right? Like pitch pine that grows like spread out, you know, one here, one there. We have all these really high density plantations. It's like, well, yeah, maybe 90% of them will die, but who cares? You know, it shouldn't be there anyway. So with ash, we have to consider what was the colonial distribution of ash and what is it supposed to look like. And that's, I guess, where I've been going back in my mind as I think about what are our goals. It's, what are we aiming for? Where are we going back to as sort of a measure of what the forest is supposed to look like? So I do think it'll be minimized, but I do think we're going to start to see regeneration. I do. I'm pretty optimistic about it. And there are people following resistance. There's a whole program devoted to ash resistance and identifying potentially resistant trees. And we've also been working with ESF, not so much on ash yet, but with chestnut, helping them kind of scale up the next level of their chestnut program to get it out on the landscape. And then with that, ESF has plans, they want to develop like a tree restoration center where they start looking at genetic resistance and, other resistance mechanisms for a lot of different tree species. So like we came to them for beech, for example, and said like, what can you do for beech? And so they're using everything they've learned with chestnut to start efforts on other tree species. And ash is essentially a part of that as well. So I think it's just changing the way we also look at this stuff. Like we need to start looking ahead, right? And so we might have these impactful events where we lose a lot, but we also have the capacity to conserve the genetics and identify resistant trees and release biocontrols. So we may lose it in the short term, but I don't think we're going to lose it in the long term.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question, about your data. I was just curious. Parks has been a great partner, I think.
Yeah.
But I wondered how your data is impacted by Parks' active participation. How does that maybe shift your data, and are you accounting for that? The fact, you're showing all these state parks have. Is it the fact that the bulk of the habitat is on state parks, so it's a fine use of it, or is it manipulating your data?
Yeah, most of the pitch pine in New York State is on state, well, the pitch pine that I'm aware of on public lands in New York State is on state parks. But also they've been great at helping us check traps and deploy traps. So it's both good partnerships, but yeah, the pitch pine is mostly on state park land.
I also just want to add a little nuance to state parks' role. For the past 15 years at least, we've been very active in restoration and active restoration and conservation of our natural resources. It was a new program that started about 15 years ago. But the essence of it has been much more focused. So there's, relatively small habitats and native species and things that have been broad focus, as opposed to large forest patches in large forested areas. The general policy of parks has been essentially leave it alone. Let it take its course. But at the same time, I've been trying to point out that we do put out fires. And so that even though we say we don't have a management plan for it, we do because we put out fires. And then even though it's like a non-decision, it's a decision. And it's a management strategy that we've taken without really considering the thoughtful impact of that. And so I've been working with our department, division of environmental stewardship and planning to think about large forested areas and that sort of role we could have to better manage those sites with the understanding that non-management is still management. And so we are working towards those larger landscape issues and considering those.
Yeah, wow, and the State Parks Forest Health Program has grown in the invasive species program so much since I've been here, and they're like, I'm super impressed. I'm jealous sometimes. I think they have a stronger program than we do. They've really done a great job identifying the major risks and doing something about it. And I think we're all on the same page now where we do treatments, right? But we don't go back. Like we cut out a hole in Glenville to suppress oak wilt, right? And now that hole is filled with a bunch of invasives that are encroaching into the stand. So what are we going to do about that oak wilt site? So I think that's our next step is we need to start doing more post-treatment rehabilitation and preventative management. But in our division, there's just a huge discrepancy, between the objective of timber sales and timber management and ecosystem health, so it's going to be a long-term strategy to get everybody in that same mindset. And our regional foresters haven't been given that guidance historically. We don't have a state silviculturist. We don't essentially have anyone in that role.
I have a couple of questions. How are you, I know that DEC recently hired a climate forester, I think, and so one of the big things we're thinking about is a lot about reforestation. And, you know, I think if you convert the acreage that we need to use for sequestration in the climate action council scoping plan, it converts like planting 680 million trees in the state by 2040, which is like,
Oh my God.
right. And there's a lot of supply chain issues there, but I'm just like, you know, people love the idea of planting trees, but they don't really understand the level of maintenance and stewardship it takes to make those trees survive. And I'm just wondering how your team is working with the folks that are thinking about how we're going to be implementing our climate goals.
Yeah, well, luckily the climate forester, Molly Hassett, comes from our shop previously. She understands, like, she's kind of, in terms of how it's going to play out programmatically, I'm not sure. But for example, you know, there was that recent sort of like environmental reforestation movement where people are like, you know, all forest management is bad again, and we just need more trees, and just more trees is better, right? And so Molly's coming out and saying, like, no, healthy trees. We need healthy trees, right? We don't need another dense plantation of that, you know, that are susceptible to invasives, and they're not growing, they're not sequestering carbon, they're just kind of stagnant, right? So she understands the value and the fact that healthy trees will essentially store more carbon or sequester more carbon. So we are working with her, but it's just still so like big picture strategic planning at this point. Our new director, Fiona Watt, is very interested. She's all over the climate forestry role, and it seems like her major goal right now is to bolster seed collection in New York and bolster our nursery capacity. And so right now, the way we're kind of talking about it is no matter what we do with reforestation, there has to be like a forest health component and a person that's there providing that guidance and the management advice, like not just out of DC, but in anything that we establish statewide, like a team of people working together to plan, right? A forest health person, a utilization person, a climate, you know, expert, and and a silviculturist or a forester. So that's kind of the way we were seeing it, is like, let's create these teams that are sort of executing this work on the landscape, but that just have like a little bit more cohesive, you know, expertise.
If I may make a plug, Molly started.
Oh, that's right.
Before she even finished school.
Oh, she's going to be like the commissioner.
Then she worked for Dylan. And then, so they plug again.
Okay. Yeah, she's really a leader. She's great to work with, and yeah.
So I'll also just say, you know, similar to what I was saying about the fire program, like the education is so important, because I work with a lot of policymakers that, you know, no animal shall ever be hunted and no tree shall ever be cut. And, you know, a few years ago, DC did a great job of amending the deer management plan to actually include forest health as a, you know, management metric for deer, because the reason our forests aren't regenerating in large parts is because deer are eating them. So I think similarly, like, you know, there's a lot that goes into forest management. Sometimes, as we know around here, the landscape looks ugly, or you have to put up a sign, we're working on it. But I think that some additional education, like information sessions from your team at DC, other teams at DC, maybe a cross-functional group of you, to help educate people, particularly people that are making sure y'all have the resources you need to do your work, to educate them about what this looks like and why it's good and why it matters. And I think finally another big thing that, you know, we really need to help educate people on is there's a perception that our forest owners, like, everything should be public land, which we can't afford. And that all of our private forest owners in New York State are like rich land barons. And, you know, 75% of our forests are privately owned, and the average forest landowner's income is less than $100,000 a year. So there's a lot of pressure on them to liquidate their property, and there's certainly not a capacity to take care of it. So the information that you all are putting out is really critical, but it would be great for all of us to be thinking about how we can work together to just get this information out in a digestible way and continue that education so that we can be successful.
Yeah, that's great input. Thank you. And I think we do need some larger level, I hate to say, we don't want another working group, right? Like, we're all part of too many working groups, but for restoration efforts, like, I was talking to the assistant director of Fish and Wildlife the other day, and it turns out we have a lot of the same questions. You know, it's like, we have to talk. So now I'm going to the rough grouse working group meeting next month, because they have the same problem we did. They're like, how are we ever going to make a difference if we can't manage on private land? We have this very, very small percentage of land that we can do something with. So until we can get something done on private land, none of it's gonna make a difference. So I think we're in that same boat. And so education and then finding ways to support them financially, right?
Do these predator species, do they affect the private sector, the paper and pulp industries, and is the private sector responding to these threats?
Down south it does, because they have, vast southern pine plantations, but also because they have the plantations. There is economic impact, but they have so much and they manage it so well, I think, at this point. But also because of the timber markets, they have the ability to do really effective management of southern pine beetle. Because it pops up and they go and cut it down and do a timber sale.
Gotcha.
And so their cost of management per acre, like 10 years ago when I looked into this, it was like a couple $100 an acre to manage. Versus for us on Long Island, it's like $3,000 to $4,000 an acre. 10 years ago, it's probably much more than that now, depending on what we're doing. But and so they have that whole utilization component. So, but it can be, there is economic impact. But in terms of like the private landowner down south, they have like cost share programs as well that support them. And I don't know the current status of those and how successful they are, but at some point they did implement that. And it was something that we always wanted to do, but we don't have as much of the drive for it in New York just because there's fewer landowners with that much of a hard pine component on their property. And, when you talk about the outreach, I thought I had a slide. I don't know if I just skipped over it, but the edge, I can't do it. It's not working. But early on, I had a picture of the banner that we put up at Rocky Point, demo forest. We essentially created a demo forest on Long Island to test certain treatments that I'm sure we consulted with Neil about first. And we put a big banner. We copied your banner, essentially. Because we were like, the pine bush has convinced this whole neighborhood that it's okay to light fires in the suburbs. And I know it took a long time. And cut trees. And it took a long time to get there. And so we were looking at the Albany pine bush and saying, what did they do right? And how do we start that? So we did essentially just rip off a bunch of, not rip off, borrow. We had your, I think we both did.
I think so. Yeah, you did, you asked.
But that's a huge lesson in and of itself, right? Just how you got over the public, challenges there.
Thank you for coming and doing this, and it highlights, I think, the need for us to continue doing what we're doing, not only with the recurring fire, but the long-term maintenance and management of ecosystem health is just critical to so many of these individual conservation issues that if we target them individually, we can get buried in the weeds. But from the beginning, we've taken an ecosystem approach, thanks largely to the Nature Conservancy's lead early on, and that's paying off.
Yeah. And numbers, look, we don't have track results from this year yet, but what Liam did have, he said they were just pretty low, a few here and there. I feel like it's just going to be.
And that's often lost, the fact that this is a native insect that simply has moved north. There's a way for it to coexist, and we're trying to figure out how to make that help make that happen. Thank you.
Way back in the Stone Age, I did my dissertation on the mountain pine beetle and ponderosa pine. Could I have a little chat with you?
Yeah.
It's supposed to be a journey.
That's cool,
anyway.
yeah.
I'd really like to do that.
Yeah, that's a great story, too.
Good.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, finally, for any other business or new business, I will take the opportunity to share some news that after, I believe, 18 years on the board, Steve Rice has advised us that he intends to step down at some point in the near future. So it goes without saying, but I'll say it, that the commission is extremely grateful for all your many years of service and support. And you certainly deserve a lot of recognition for all of those years. So thank you.
Here, here.
You started working with us shortly after you came to Union, because you knew Stephanie, and we had that connection, and you started doing work here, and we had an opportunity for a board opening, and I said, you'd be a great board member. And he was like, yeah, I don't know about that. But I'm sure have.
It's been more to my benefit than I'm sure anything I contributed here. Just seeing the professionalization of of the organization from the top to the bottom. You know, it's just, I just come here and learn so, you know, nice example today, you know, learn so much, and you can share that with my students, inform the work that I do. It's just, you know, it's just been a joy. And at one point, I'm just pivoting back to the county as I retire this year, and I just, you know, just seemed like a citizen membership, you know, should be kind of a little bit closer, even in proximity to it. So it's just more of a change. I wish I'd be like Nancy and, you know, join us as I retire and really continue to contribute as she does. You know, every single interaction.
We still have plenty of opportunities to EPA.
Yeah. Can't get away.
And we appreciate your flexibility with the transition period.
Whatever works.
Yeah, so we're announcing, you know, here and now, we have an open call for expressions of interest. And if that could be included in the minutes, that'd be great. We're gonna keep it open until close of business on October 31st. So if anyone, you know, present or listening or in the future reading the minutes is interested in submitting their information for consideration, we would welcome that. But thank you again, Steve. Yeah.
Sorry, I probably should have put it earlier. I don't know exactly when to put it, but I have two updates I'd like to provide. One is that the Invasive Species Expo is happening starting this weekend, Sunday, and then Sunday is a public sort of portion, very fun, a lot of demos and things like that. And then Monday and Tuesday is a professional portion, although still a lot of fun, a lot of demos and things like that. So it's free to the public. It's State Parks is partnering with DEC on this, as well as I believe Ag and Markets and USDA and others. It should be really great. We have over 500 people signed up right now. It's at Saratoga Spa State Park. As long as the weather holds out, most of it is to be outside and hopefully really enjoyable. Look into that. Hopefully, you know, your weekend or your next weekend can totally hold up. But if you can make it, that'd be awesome. It should be a really great opportunity to learn about invasive species and network with others who care about that too. The other thing I want to add is that I don't think I can say now because it's official enough, but we've been partnering with the DEC and Pine Bush on our Big Bend Preserve as part of Monroe Lake State Park. It's a couple of years ago, we acquired roughly 1,000 acres up in Monroe Lake State Park, right on the shore of the Hudson River, just in Southwest Falls area, Monroe area. But we're working with the DEC and Pine Bush to establish it as the third carnivorous preserve, carnivorous butterfly recovery area, as recommended in the federal recovery plan. So we finished, for the most part, our seeker documentation for this plan for the recreation and conservation components. We actually received a $750,000 grant from the Fish and Wildlife Service to move a 5-year management plan forward. Waiting for their processes to begin. They're very far behind. Our lead partner person took another position, so there's a lot of weird things happening up there, and so we're waiting for that to finalize before we can really officially move forward with a lot of our conservation work. But we have basically a 6-year plan to establish enough habitat at Big Bend to have a viable metapopulation if all things came out the way we hope it will. And also, we I don't know if it was announced this or not, but we do have a signed MOU with the Pine Bush for allowing them to work directly with us for prescribed bird activities, and it is intended to be managed through prescribed fire with the help of Neil and his staff. So we're very, very excited about that. Should see a lot of movement on that in 2024. So really excited about that, and very thankful for the Pine Bush and DEC for the support on that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I was just going to add one thing. Everything you heard in this meeting, you heard how important it is, not just our work here in the Pine Bush, but how much more broad it is, not just locally, not in the capital region, not just New York, but in the Northeast. I don't think anybody really envisioned it when they created the Pine Bush Commission back in 1988, of how important it is to be able to work together with these partners. Even go back to Jackie's presentation, you saw the partners that we helped with CPR and first aid training. So that's something that we as an organization are really proud of. So.
Any other new business? If not, can we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that.
Do you want to mention that on governance committee?
Oh, we'll do that.
Got it. Okay? We're done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you.